Usually when we start one of these deep dives, we're talking about a tech breakthrough or maybe a historical mystery.
Something that feels a little more distant.
Distant, exactly. But the stack of documents on the desk today, this feels immediate. It feels like a collision.
That is the perfect word for it, a collision.
Yeah, a collision between what a massive billion-dollar infrastructure project on one hand and a humanitarian disaster on the other. Because if you were standing on the steps of the Alabama State Capitol yesterday, that's February 18, 2026, you weren't seeing a ribbon cutting. You were seeing candles.
Hundreds of them. This was the vigil.
Right. And I really want to linger on that image for a second. You have hundreds of people from all across the state huddled in the cold, holding photos.
Photos of their sons, their fathers, their brothers.
And they're not just mourning in a general sense. They are marking a very specific and a very grim timeline.
They are marking the time since the Department of Justice stepped in.
Exactly. And the number that anchors this entire conversation, the number that was on everyone's mind at that vigil, is 1,500.
Which it's a number that's genuinely hard to process.
It really is. It's 1,500 people who have died in Alabama state custody just since 2019.
And 2019 is the key year here.
That's the year the U.S. Department of Justice officially put the state on notice that its prisons were violating the Constitution.
To put that in perspective, I mean, that's the population of a small American town.
Gone.
Just completely wiped out in 7 years, inside a system that has a constitutional mandate to keep them safe.
And that's really the mission for our deep dive today. We have a mountain of source material here. I mean, federal DOJ reports that read like horror stories. We have investigative files from Alabama Appleseed.
State budget reports on this new $1.2 billion mega prison.
And transcripts from a documentary that kind of ironically shares the name of the state's own policy, the Alabama Solution.
So we need to unpack how a system that was flagged for being unconstitutionally violent decided the fix was a construction project, and why, 7 years later, the death toll is still climbing.
Okay, so let's go back to the starting line, the notice, April 2019.
Right. The Civil Rights Division of the DOJ drops this bombshell on the state of Alabama.
And looking at the language in this report, I mean, they didn't mince words at all.
No, they didn't. They stated they had reasonable cause to believe Alabama was violating the Eighth Amendment.
Which, for most people, that's the one about cruel and unusual punishment, right?
That's the one. And I think people hear that and imagine, medieval dungeons or something.
Yeah.
But in modern legal terms, it means something very specific. Deliberate indifference.
Explain what that means.
Well, the state takes away your freedom, which it has the right to do, but in exchange, it has an absolute obligation to provide for your basic safety.
So the DOJ was saying, you are failing.
Systemically. You are failing that obligation on a systemic level.
And the stats backing that up are, well, shocking. Feels like an understatement. I was looking at the homicide rate.
It's off the charts.
In 2019, the homicide rate inside Alabama prisons was over 7 times the national average.
It's a war zone statistic. I mean, if you look at the free world, maybe 7 or 8 people out of every 100,000 are victims of homicide.
And inside these facilities?
73 per 100,000.
Wow. And the racial disparity just jumps off the page, too. The reports highlight that black men were 3.3 times more likely to be killed in custody than white men.
Yeah. One of the reports literally calls the system a death trap.
And that's not just hyperbole.
No, it's a description of the mechanics of the prison. The DOJ found prisoner-on-prisoner violence, sexual abuse, excessive force by staff. But the state didn't fix it.
Right, because by December 2020, things got even worse. The DOJ actually sued them.
They basically said, okay, we warned you, nothing's changed, now we're taking you to court.
And the lawsuit lists everything from, open sewage to mold and broken locks.
Which brings us to the core question. Why? Why is it so deadly? Because I think the average person might think, well, it's prison, it's full of criminals, of course it's dangerous.
But the sources, they paint a picture that goes way, way beyond bad guys doing bad things. It looks like a complete breakdown of structure.
A total collapse.
And reading through all these findings, the root cause just seems to scream staffing.
It's the domino that knocks everything else over. The vacancy rates for correctional officers in major facilities like Holman and Bibb were
over 50%, right?
Often exceeding 50%.
I mean, imagine trying to run a high school or a hospital where half the staff just doesn't show up forever.
Exactly. And in a prison, that creates a power vacuum. The state effectively just ceded control of the dorms.
So it happens.
The sources describe a Lord of the Flies environment where the prisoners police themselves because there are simply no guards to watch the doors.
And this connects directly to the drug crisis inside, which I found fascinating, in a really grim way. Because you see this massive spike in overdoses, Flocka, fentanyl. But a huge number of these deaths happened during COVID.
When the facilities were on total lockdown, no visitors.
That's what I mean. No visitors, no families, no contractors. The prisons were sealed tight. So logically, if the drugs didn't stop coming in,
Then the supply chain was wearing a uniform.
it has to be. The math just doesn't work any other way.
And investigators confirmed that. It was the aha moment for them. With no one else coming into the facility, the drugs had to be coming in through staff corruption.
You've got officers who are underpaid, overworked.
And in some cases, completely compromised by the gangs that are running the dorms.
There was that one story in the files about a guy named Blake. Did you see that one?
The young man who overdosed when visits were suspended.
Yeah. It's heartbreaking. He was in for a non-violent offense, struggled with addiction. He was supposed to be in a secure environment.
And he relapsed and died on drugs that shouldn't have been within 10 miles of him.
During a time when his own mother couldn't even visit him.
It just highlights that you can't lock your way out of an addiction crisis if the people holding the keys are the ones bringing in the product.
And speaking of holding the keys, we have to talk about the physical decay.
Yeah.
Because the DOJ report, it mentions broken locks. But this wasn't just a maintenance issue.
No, it was a survival issue. This is one of the most disturbing details. In some units, the locking mechanisms on the cell doors just didn't work.
They'd rusted out or been broken.
So you have guys, tying their doors shut with strips of bed sheets?
Or sleeping in shifts. One person stays awake to guard the door while the other one sleeps because they literally could not lock the world out.
You're in a cage that you can't even secure.
And this physical decay, the mold, the locks, the fire hazards, this is where the state made its pivot. They looked at all this and said, okay, we have a solution.
The Alabama solution.
Which, confusingly, is both a policy and a movie. Let's start with the policy.
Right.
Governor Kay Ivey and her administration, they argue that the problem was the hardware. The buildings were too old, the sight lines were bad.
You can't keep people safe in a crumbling ruin. That was the logic.
So the solution was to build.
To build. Specifically, this massive infrastructure plan headlined by the Elmore Specialized Men's Facility.
Which is a beast of a project.
Yeah.
We're talking about a 4,000-bed facility. And the price tag.
It ballooned. The reports show it swelled to over $1.2 billion.
$1.2 billion.
Which makes it one of the most expensive prison complexes ever built in U.S. history.
And the sales pitch was that this was going to be a campus, right?
Yeah, that's the word they used. Senator Clyde Chambliss and others talked about vocational training welding, HVAC, medical units.
So the idea being modern facilities equal modern rehabilitation.
That is the logic. If you fix the sightlines, you fix the violence. If you fix the classrooms, you fix recidivism.
But this is where the other Alabama solution comes in.
The documentary.
Yes. Because right around the time this mega prison is supposed to be opening, this film comes out with the exact same title.
And the filmmakers, led by Andrew Jarecki, are arguing that the governor's solution is just a very expensive wrapper on a rotten product.
And that documentary is such a critical piece of evidence for us because of how it was filmed.
Right. This wasn't a camera crew getting a guided tour of the new welding shop.
No, this was all contraband footage.
Exactly. Filmed by the prisoners themselves. We're seeing footage from the Free Alabama movement, from guys like Kinetic Justice, that's Robert Earl Counsel.
Who was filming from solitary confinement.
From solitary, which goes right back to the corruption point we made earlier.
The same lack of security that lets fentanyl in is what let these cell phones in.
And that allowed them to broadcast the reality the state was trying to hide.
Take the case of Stephen Davis. He died in 2019.
The state's official story was pretty standard. He rushed officers with a weapon. They used necessary force to subdue him. Case closed.
But the film challenges that.
The film blows it apart. They used prisoner accounts and footage to allege a cover-up, suggesting he was beaten by guards in a way that had nothing to do with self-defense.
It just exposes this massive gap.
A huge gap between the Alabama solution as this polished PR slogan and the actual brutality happening behind the walls.
So you have the state saying, we're building a $1.2 billion solution, and the prisoners are saying, you're just building a bigger death trap?
Exactly.
But here's the thing that really stuck with me from the Appleseed reports. You can build a 4,000-bed prison. You can make it state-of-the-art. But that only works if the system flows.
You mean people have to be able to leave.
Exactly. And according to all the data, the back door of Alabama's prisons has been nailed shut. This is the parole freeze.
This part of the story is, statistically, it's almost harder to believe than the death toll.
The numbers are wild. The guidelines suggest that about 80% of eligible candidates, people who've done their time, finished their programs, good behavior, should be getting parole.
80%, that's the baseline.
But by 2023 and 2024, what was the actual grant rate?
It had plummeted to around 8%.
From 80% suggested to 8% actual?
Yeah. I mean, that's not a statistical drift. That is a blockade.
A deliberate policy shift.
Right. Experts call it the Leigh-Guathny effect. She's the chair of the parole board who has taken an incredibly hardline stance. But to be fair to the context here, this didn't happen in a vacuum.
It was triggered by a specific tragedy.
The Jimmy O'Neill Spencer case.
Right.
In 2018, Spencer was a parolee. He was out, and he committed 3 murders in Guntersville, a horrific crime. And the political fallout was instantaneous.
It's the classic Willie Horton effect.
Precisely. The parole board essentially decided that the political risk of releasing one person who might reoffend outweighed the moral or legal obligation to release thousands of people who were rehabilitated.
So they just swung the pendulum.
All the way to nobody gets out.
But the cost of that, I mean, the human cost is staggering. The prison population is aging rapidly. A 15% increase in prisoners over 60. You're basically turning prisons into nursing homes.
Dangerous, understaffed nursing homes.
And there's a statistic here that I had to read 3 times just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. It's about sentences of life with parole.
Yes. The virtual life sentence.
In a recent reporting period, more people with that sentence died in Alabama custody than were actually granted parole.
That's right. It was 115 people died, while only 75 were granted parole.
So death is now a more common way out of prison than parole.
If you have a life with parole sentence in Alabama right now, you are statistically more likely to leave in a body bag than you are to walk out the front door.
That brings it all full circle, doesn't it? We started at the Vigil, February 18, 2026. You have families holding candles for 1,500 dead.
And then just down the road, you have this nearly completed $1.2 billion facility.
It really forces you to ask, what are we actually building here?
Right.
The state's logic was the conditions are unconstitutional because the buildings are old. So new buildings equals constitutional conditions.
But the critics and the DOJ are saying, no, the conditions are unconstitutional because of the culture.
A new building doesn't magically hire the 2,000 officers you're missing.
A new building doesn't fire the corrupt staff bringing in the drugs.
And a new building definitely doesn't fix a parole board that refuses to let rehabilitated people leave.
It feels like trying to solve a software virus by buying a more expensive laptop case.
That is a perfect analogy. The Alabama solution was infrastructure, but the crisis is human.
It's staffing, it's corruption, and it's a bottleneck in the release system. Until you fix the software, the new prison is just a change of address for the same tragedy.
And a very, very expensive change of address. We're talking billions of taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, and if the goal is public safety, is this the best return on that investment? Spending billions to warehouse elderly men who pose no threat while young men inside are dying from preventable overdoses.
So here's the thought we want to leave you with today. And it's a heavy one, especially thinking about those families at the Vigil. If the Alabama solution was to build a $1 billion facility to fix unconstitutional conditions, but you don't fix the corruption and you don't let anyone out, is that new prison actually a solution?
Or have we just built the most expensive warehouse for human beings in the history of the United States?
And if it is just a warehouse, what happens when it gets full?
That is a terrifying thought to end on, but an important one.
As always, thanks for diving deep with us. It wasn't an easy topic today, but these are the ones that matter.
Take care, everyone.
See you next time.